Hi everybody, and welcome to Ophtho Odysseys. I'm your host, Mark Johnson. I'm currently an ophthalmology intern in Birmingham, Alabama, and the goal of this series is going to be to provide you with memorable and hopefully fun visual mnemonics to remember the difficult diseases and concepts in ophthalmology for your OCAP exams. I'll put out as many of these videos as I'm able to if people like them, as my schedule permits in intern year. And the best part is I'm going to keep all of them free, so no future subscription plans. We're going to start this series off with Goldmann-Favre syndrome, which is a cone-dominant cone rod dystrophy. So we're going to symbolize Goldmann-Favre syndrome with this large gold man. Gold man for Goldmann-Favre syndrome. It's also known as enhanced S-cone syndrome, which we're going to symbolize with this large pile of blue cones in the middle of this park. Remember, as a quick aside, that S stands for short, referring to the short wavelengths, which are the blue wavelengths. So short wavelength cones are the blue detecting cones in your eye. So this is a diffuse photoreceptor dystrophy in which multiple of the photoreceptors in the eye are not working properly. So we're going to symbolize the dysfunctional rods, which are completely non-functioning in this disease, with this broken fishing rod. Broken fishing rod for dysfunctional rods, which is going to be our recurring symbol for non-functioning rods in the eye. Now, also in this syndrome, we're going to see a reduced number of red and green cones, which we're going to symbolize with one red cone and one green cone that's kind of knocked over. So that should help you remember the decreased number of red and green cones seen in Goldmann-Favre or enhanced S-cone syndrome. And again, of course, we have this large number of blue cones here to remember the fact that there's an increase in number of blue cones in enhanced S-cone syndrome. So what causes all this photoreceptor dysfunction? There's a gene called NR2E3. That's all the BCSC mentions. That's all you need to know. We'll symbolize this gene with two nuclear receptacles. Nuclear receptacle for NR and two of them for the 2. NR2E3. If you're curious, it's a transcription factor involved in the development and maintenance of photoreceptors, which explains this widespread photoreceptor dysfunction. Now, if you have 2 copies of this gene, then you get the disease. It's an autosomal recessive disease. So we will symbolize that with our current symbol for autosomal recessive, a small automobile. Small automobile for autosomal recessive. If we have an autosomal dominant condition in the future, we'll have a large dominant automobile, like a dump truck or a large truck. So, with these dysfunctional rods, it's not surprising that these patients from birth typically have nyctalopia, or night blindness. So we're going to symbolize that with our recurrent symbol for nyctalopia, or night blindness, which is the moon wearing sunglasses. I don't know about you, but when I see the moon, that's kind of my association with the nighttime. So if you imagine wearing sunglasses at night, you're not going to be able to see squat. So that's going to be our recurrent symbol for nyctalopia, is a moon wearing sunglasses. So now that we've covered the naming and pathophysiology of this disease, let's talk about the physical exam signs that you would see. A classically described finding is that you see this yellow sheen along the vascular arcades. That's only seen in about 50% of cases, but rather than add a new symbol for this, we're just going to remember that as we have this large gold man statue. Just think about the yellow sheen from the gold. Remember that being along the vascular arcades. Now, another thing that you'll see is kind of nummular or coin-shaped pigmentary deposits around the arcades. The way we're going to remember that is we're going to have our recurring symbol for retinitis pigmentosa. So our recurrent symbol for retinitis pigmentosa is going to be fruit that is overripe. Ripe for RP, or retinitis pigmentosa. And now, since we have pears specifically that are overripe, for me, the word pear reminds me of the word peripheral. So a pear that's overripe is going to be our symbol for peripheral retinitis pigmentosa appearance, referring to those nummular pigmentary changes that you see around the arcades. Now, something else that you can see with this condition is macular schisis, which overlaps the phenotype of X-linked juvenile retinoschisis. Now, in another video, our recurrent symbol for X-linked juvenile retinoschisis is going to be a kid going skiing, or a juvenile going skiing, skiing for schisis. So we have this little kid here holding a bowl of mac and cheese, and mac and cheese reminds me of macula. So if we have a kid going skiing holding on to a bowl of mac and cheese, that's our symbol for macular X-linked juvenile retinoschisis appearance. So you can see schisis within the macula in this condition. Now, another thing you'll see is something called an optically empty vitreous. What that refers to is just that if you look in the vitreous on a slit lamp exam, you're not going to see any fibrils or anything in the vitreous. It's going to be optically clear back to the retina. We'll symbolize the optically empty vitreous as an empty jar of jam. If you think of the vitreous as a jar of jam and then you take out all the jam, that kind of tracks for me as a symbol for an optically empty vitreous. Now, I'd recommend you go ahead and pause this video and do some Google image searching on what this yellow sheen looks like, what the nummular pigmentary deposits around the arcades can look like, and what the macular schisis can look like. Now, let's move on and talk about the ERG in this condition. So, unsurprisingly in this condition, anything that's looking at rod function is going to not be detectable. So the DA 0.01 or the dark adapted 0.01 signal on ERG is going to be non-detectable, which just makes sense. Now, there's also going to be this similar response that if you do a bright flash under dark adapted or light adapted conditions, there's not going to be a change in the response, which makes sense because your rods aren't doing anything. So there's not going to be any change in the response, whether you're in dark or in light conditions. And then you're also going to have a delayed and reduced amplitude on your light adapted 30 Hertz signal, which again, that makes sense. It's going to be delayed and reduced in amplitude because your cones aren't working properly. Yes, you've got S cones that are working, but your other kinds of cones, your red and your green cones, are not working, so you can have reduced electrical activity and delayed electrical activity, since those aren't working well. I'm not going to symbolize any of that because all of that should just make sense as far as the ERG findings. I would also recommend you look at some pictures of that as well. So how do you actually diagnose enhanced S-cone syndrome? It's not necessarily from the morphologic appearance. Really, you get genetic testing and the characteristic ERG findings. Those are what cinch the diagnosis of Goldmann-Favre or enhanced S-cone syndrome. I hope you enjoyed our stroll together in the city park, and let's summarize what we've discussed so far. So Goldmann-Favre syndrome, also known as enhanced S-cone syndrome, is a diffuse photoreceptor dystrophy with non-functioning rods, with decreased red and green cones, and an increased number of blue cones. It's caused by an autosomal recessive mutation in the NR2E3 gene. It presents with nyctalopia from childbirth. Morphologically, on physical exam, you're going to see a yellow sheen along the arcades and in the periphery. Also, you'll have an RP, or retinitis pigmentosa-like appearance in the periphery, macular schisis, which overlaps the phenotype and appearance of X-linked juvenile retinoschisis, and an optically empty vitreous. So I hope you enjoyed this first video. If you have any feedback or comments, I would love to hear it, because I'm doing this so that residents have a resource that they can study for the OCAPs for. So if you don't like it or you want to see a change, I would love to hear that. And if you'd like to contribute at all, that would be great if you have any diagnostic, photographs, OCTs, ERGs, anything like that that I can include in future videos. That way people don't have to Google and find them on their own. Or if you're it would also be great if you are interested in helping me make the videos themselves, such as writing scripts for these, making the digital art in Adobe Illustrator, using Adobe After Effects to put them together into the video. If you want to be a host and record the dialogue, if you want to help me make PDFs with annotations from the videos so that people can study without watching the videos, make Anki decks, anything like that, I would love to hear from you. So if so, shoot me an email at mark.sfmatch@gmail.com. As a final note, I'd like to thank Stephen Flynn for his AAO OCAP PowerPoints. I heavily based this presentation off of them, so I'd like to thank him for his contributions. I also used the BCSC as well as the iWiki article on enhanced S-cone syndrome. Thank you all so much, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.